Hello and welcome to Behind the Mask, Thriving in Healthcare, a podcast created for healthcare employees to explore not only issues relating to mental and emotional health, but also unique challenges that those working in healthcare are faced with. Your hosts are Adina Tucker, a licensed clinical social worker with Dartmouth Health, and Jennifer Hensey, an MSW also with Dartmouth Health. Hello. This episode, we are going to be talking about tips for talking with your teen. Today, we have with us Pam Bertolino, and she has been an LICSW for the last 35 years. She has worked with families and teens in private practice, community mental health, and also on inpatient psych units. And she is the mother of 2 daughters. So, thank you for joining us, Pam. We're super excited to talk to you today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk to you too. I love your podcasts.
Thanks, Pam.
Thanks. And I live with 3 teenagers, so I'm excited to get your guidance on some of this stuff because I am having a hard time lately with some of their stuff. Jennifer, do you want to ask a question first?
Sure, yeah. I'd love to kick it off. I know you have lots of great experience, Pam. You know, I don't have kids myself, but podcasts and topics like these, they cause me to reflect a lot on my own childhood and questions that I might have when working with folks in the future. And so I was curious, for parents who have built a history with their kids of only talking to them when their kids are in trouble, how can parents help diffuse that kind of tension or maybe the apprehension that their teen might feel when their mom or dad approaches them for a talk?
Well, I think the key to that is to talk to them at other times, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you have to have a connection all the time. And it's really important to have connection and conversations during positive times too, because
Right.
if you're just talking to them about discipline or what they did wrong,
Mm.
they're really not going to hear you because they don't have the opposite of it, right? So there's no relationship with which to build upon that.
Mm.
So if you're just always yelling at them or saying, "Oh, you did that wrong," or whatever, we need to talk about you being grounded. It doesn't really feel like a relationship that's two ways. And I think what kids need and what teens need is to really feel respected and as people.
Mm-hmm.
So the way to do that is to have a relationship all the time and just not at the times when they're in trouble.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. That's great. Thank you.
I have a question kind of piggybacking off of that. So I went through a period with my now 16-year-old where he was just, real angry about everything. And I would try to connect with him, but when I would ask him questions or try to, and not even like how was your school day, but just about things I knew he was interested in, all he would give me was one word answers if he answered at all. So it was really hard to get him to engage with me. And I know part of it is it's hard to remove yourself as a parent, even if you like kind of know what to do. But are there some ways to change or facilitate more open conversations with your teen if you find that they're in that space where they're just only giving you one word answers and they're just really have their walls up as far as engaging with you?
Yeah, there are different ways to do that. I mean, first of all, I would say try to connect with them on an activity that they like. If they're really into video gaming, even if you hate it, see if you can do a game with them. Tell them about a TV show you're watching and maybe talk about that. The best way is to not have any criticism. So you could ask them, what are you excited about right now? And if they say something that you think is completely ridiculous, you can't say that ever. You have to say, really? Tell me why it excites you. Maybe listen to some of their favorite music. Tell them about a book that you're reading. Things like that, I think are ways. And then there are also, specific questions like, you've probably heard this before. Tell me one good thing that happened in your day today. Tell me who you ate lunch with today. Or the other thing I've heard recently is, if your life were like the weather, what's the weather like today in your life? If you ask kind of pointed questions like that, sometimes they'll elaborate on it, sometimes they won't. And the key to that is when they won't just keep your cool and try and stay neutral, try not to react like, you never talk to me. And how am I supposed to get along with you if you don't talk? Don't, try to just stay even the best you can, because I think the best advice I ever got was actually from my 21-year-old daughter, who said, when I asked her, I was telling her about this podcast, and I said, what was helpful? And she said, you didn't react to things. I could tell you something huge, and I just knew that you just were going to listen. Now, inside, I might have been like, oh my God, I can't believe this. Or, whatever, my kid's failing or whatever's going on. You just have to try not to react and just be loving and supportive as best you can. And we always can't do that. Obviously, we're humans, but the best you can, I think that's one of the keys.
That's such good advice. And I can really see how impactful that can be because I mean, our kids are going to model what we show them. But okay, so on that,
Yeah.
I'm curious. So let's say you're in the middle of a conflict with your teen, like maybe they've broken a huge rule and now you have to enforce some discipline and you're trying to remain calm and composed and not reacting too much. And you're getting more heated and more upset. They're getting more heated and upset, but you end up losing your cool. What's the best way for a parent to recover and repair with your teen in that moment?
I would say take a time out. I mean, we've got to lead by example, right? So we want our kids, even when they're 2 and 3, to have timeouts. I think timeouts for parents are terrific. I can remember locking myself in the bathroom, just trying to breathe and meditate or whatever I needed to do before I would react to something. So, I mean, you can always say, you know what? I didn't mean to yell like that. I didn't mean to react that way. Give me 5 minutes and I'll be back. Because you're also teaching them ways to deal with anger and frustration, and then it's okay to take a break and then come back to it. So that's what I would suggest, if you lose it, because we all lose it.
That's great. Thank you.
I feel like something that I've encountered a lot in just not from me, but from someone else that has to deal with my teens on a regular basis is a frustration. And I feel like I've heard it from other parents around, well, they need to respect me. They need to respect me. And I feel like with teens, it seems like even more so than younger children, that can become an issue because sometimes I feel like to me, it seems like the teenager doesn't feel very respected. And so it's kind of a two-way street. So if you've gotten yourself into a dynamic where you are constantly being disrespected by your teen, do you feel like it's necessary to maybe do some self-reflection as to your own behavior, or what are some things that could be done to improve that dynamic? Because I feel like a lot of times our children, even our teenagers, do react to what we put out there. And sometimes it's hard to look in the mirror.
Yeah, I can definitely see where that happens. I think, there has to be mutual respect, and teens, kids, and, of any age need to feel like they're being treated as people, and that it's not so hierarchical, like I'm the parent, you're the child, you must do as I say and respect me no matter what. I think that type of dictatorship doesn't ever work, and kids feel minimized. So, I think in a lot of ways, for me, for example, I think that's the way I was raised, and I hated it because I didn't really have a voice. And I think that can lead to being rebellious. For me, it's learned, as my mother would say, it taught me to be mouthy. You're always so mouthy, Pamela. So I think, kids rebel in different ways. But yeah, I think if you set firm boundaries at the outset, like this is what, maybe even having family meetings, this is what I expect, you know, you can be angry, you can do this, you can do that. You're not allowed to throw things. You're not allowed to slam the doors. We don't call each other names. If there are like family rules, ground rules in the beginning, I think that can help with that. But yeah, I think self-reflection is definitely a good idea, but also think about the kind of parent that you want to be. What kind of parent do I want to be? How was I raised? What did I like? What did I not like? And try to form, with your partner, if there's a partner that's co-parenting with you, how you want it to look like. But I think above all, you have to respect your kids before you're going to get any respect at all.
No, that makes sense.
Mhm. I think you've made a great point too, touching on repeating patterns that
Hmm.
perhaps we learned from our own parents. And so I was wondering if you had any tips on how might how might parents go about really intentionally thinking about the sort of parenting patterns that they might have learned or picked up from their own parents? I know that, going to therapy is obviously an option to try to work those things out, maybe long term. But just, on your own, I know we talk a lot too about developing mindfulness and things like that. But do you have any tips on what parents can do, maybe in the short term, to just kind of reevaluate what they have picked up and what they're carrying into their relationship with their teen?
Well, one thing that I recently read about, you've probably all heard about Dr. Gary Chapman and his five love languages. I recently read that he also does that for teens, and I found that really interesting because I think it helps us to really reflect on the kind of parent we want to be and just to look at our kids as individuals, because you can have two kids and they can be night and day. And this other kid, no way, they would hate that. They want me just to, tell them that they're doing a good job. So I think if you kind of look at what the kids need, it kind of makes us go back and reflect at what kind of parents we are. So in terms of the love languages, I feel like that was a way to help you understand what kind of parent you are in terms of looking at what types of children you have and what they may or may not need. Obviously, looking at therapy, reading parenting books, that kind of stuff is also helpful. But I thought this approach was really interesting because, some children require physical touch, like hugging, giving them a high five or a fist bump or whatever. That's really important to them. They like to cuddle up and watch a movie together. So for them, that may be you showing them love. Another child might just need to be together, have some hangout time. Let's go run, do an errand together. And then they might talk in the car. And just as a side note, I always found the car to be a really good place to get the tea, as my kids would say, because they would be talking to their friends and I could often get the real information, the real scoop on things. So that's just an insider's tip. And another child might want, words of affirmation like, oh, you did such a great job. I know you really tried hard on that test. And then the other ones are receiving gifts like, leaving a candy bar in their lunchbox or something like that to tell them that you really appreciate them. So just in terms of that, in terms of the love languages, I think it's important just to know what your specific child needs, because we don't always think of it in that way. They're just like the kids with a parent, you just got to get on with things. But I think if you can tune into them in that way, it kind of helps to build the connection, and it kind of helps you to know how to parent that particular child, because we can't parent the same way to every single child. We really have to individualize it.
That's a super interesting thing that I never considered, but I could see how the same way that you would ask your partner, when do you feel most loved by me? Just asking your child like the same thing.
Yeah.
Or what is something that you wish I would do more of or less of? I think I feel like for me, it feels like the reason why that's more difficult is because while our partners may try to sugarcoat things, children usually don't. And so perhaps the answer we get about, is there something that you'd like me to do more of or less of? It might be delivered in a super prickly way. But I do think that it's important, especially when they're teenagers, or at least it's been my experience with these last couple of years with my own kids, is that, they are becoming adults and having some of these more
Yeah.
respectful and adult conversations with them and giving them more autonomy about stuff just really prepares them
Mm.
for other relationships, and also knowing what they want out of their, what they're willing to tolerate out of relationships, even watching like how you interact with your partner and those kinds of things. So I never thought to do that, but I feel like I will do that this week. I'm going to ask all the kids.
Yeah, and I think you have to brace yourself. Like you said, it could be an ugly answer. So just try to stay calm because you're asking. So they're going to
Yeah.
say, "All right, I can say whatever I want." She asked me, I'm going to let it fly. So just be prepared.
Yeah.
They also might feel really valued that you're asking. I mean, that's the hope, right? That's what the connection, that's what we're talking about. We're hoping that they feel connected to us in a way that they can be more vocal and express what they need.
I feel like one of the things that I've noticed when you were talking earlier about, connect with your child about what they're into. And I've seen it. I know I've seen it with other friends of mine when I was a teenager, and even
Hmm.
with people in my own life where they want to they'll the adult wants to put their own interests on their child. So maybe I'm really into this sport, so I'm going to be like, "Yeah, come do this with me." And the kid's like, "No, I don't want to do that." And it's, cuz like I personally, my son is into video games and I'm terrible at video games. I'm not very good, but I've tried to, I've asked him like, "Cool, can you teach me? Can I?" And he actually thought it was one of the best days because he's like, "You're really bad at this." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know." And so then he would say, "Stay right here. I'm going to go come back and get you." And so it was
Hmm.
really nice. But I feel like, it's not always necessarily the thing you want to do, but it really does show your child that, I want to know more about you and what you're into. And I do think it can really help.
Yeah, and that kind of piggybacks on the same thing you just said about, you would ask your partner questions. It's in, sometimes you have to do things, watch ridiculous TV shows like, I don't know, my husband watches some like, the people in the wilderness who are trying to make it, or I don't know what they are, but some of those shows, but sometimes I just have to watch them, shut my mouth and just watch them just to be together. So it's kind of like the same thing with your kids. So I think that was a good comparison you made, Adina.
Hmm. Yeah. And it kind of reminds me of that phrase of meeting people where they're at,
Yeah.
right? And I think for kids especially, they're often, whether it's parents or culture or school, classmates, peers, there's a lot of projecting onto and what you ought to be and what you should be doing, right? And all these things. But really forging a connection, treating them like an individual and what their interests are like they matter, right? I think that is really important, an important way to connect. And I was thinking too about, you know, healthy physical connection, healthy physical touch for teenagers specifically from parents. I know that it's really easy to, pick up and hug a toddler because they want that attention, right? They'll hug back. They like being cuddled. But as kids grow up, become teenagers, it might start to feel awkward, right? There's lots of different things going on. But even for parents, it might feel a little awkward or odd or even perceiving rejection from their teenagers. Oh, like they don't want me to do this. But I was wondering if you can talk about why, for teenagers and their development in particular, is healthy physical touch from parents still really important?
Well, I think it really depends on the teenager. I think it's important, in general, because if we've done it their whole life and all of a sudden we stop, then what's the message we're giving them? Oh, you're weird now. Something's wrong with you. I don't find you lovable. I mean, there are all kinds of ways that they could interpret that. So I think that's probably the most important thing. But then also, you have to kind of gauge it by your particular teenager and what they need. So if you are someone that always hugs them before bed and they all of a sudden say, "Ooh, don't do that," I think you have to pay attention to that. And then maybe have a conversation about it. Really, I've always done that. What about that makes you feel weird? I don't know, just get away from me, or whatever they might say. So you have to watch the cues, but you also want to make sure that you don't all of a sudden abruptly change things, particularly with fathers and daughters. They might feel like they can't hug them anymore, kiss them anymore because they're developing or whatever. But I think it's important to continue those same things and just be mindful of the particular child and what their reactions are.
That's great.
I know I've started asking, "May I give you a hug?" Because that was one of the
Yeah.
things
Yep.
growing up that, or not growing up, but early on, a lot of my previous work was around like sexual abuse and that kind of stuff. So we had a whole list of things that I would go through about like body rules and like your body is yours and you get to decide if you don't want to hug grandma. I don't care if you haven't seen her in 2 years, you don't have to. And the same thing with me. So
Yeah.
as
Yep.
I've always asked for hugs, but especially now that they're older, I'll ask, "Is it okay if I give you a hug?" But when you were talking about the
Hmm.
daughters, because I remember, and it's something I've kind of noticed because we have two teenage daughters, that there is a different shift between the dads and the daughters. And I remember feeling like certain things were like, ugh, when I was in that stage as well. And is there anything that like dads can do in terms of like maybe things they should, if they've always talked about like one thing I've noticed is that like our girls get very aggravated if there's any comments made about a woman's appearance or anything like that. So,
Yep.
and I remember feeling that way as well. So I'm just wondering if there are things in that arena as far as things for dads to be aware of as their daughters are maturing that maybe they should kind of change, just the things they're saying or how they interact or be more mindful of it.
Yeah, I think they should not say anything for about 5 years based on my own experience, and it
That's what
yeah.
I s
I mean, my husband in particular is a big jokester, so he would joke about stuff like that, and I would always have to try like, I could see the look on my either daughter's face, like, "Oh god, I can't believe you said that." So, yeah, they do have to change things. They can't tease them about, like, or for example, "You look like a girl the way you throw that," or just any kind of, like, thing that might not seem like a big deal, they have to be really careful about, and particularly about women's bodies, like if they're watching a TV show and a woman, appears and she's a model or whatever, they can't even say things like, "Oh, she's hot," or "She's beautiful," or whatever, because it just really grosses girls out. And again, you just
Mm,
have to kind of tune in to your particular child. There might be other kids that don't pay any attention to that, but both of my children who are girls really paid attention to that kind of stuff. And I really had to help my husband kind of revamp the way he said things and did things. And I would say things like, you can tell me later and we can talk about it, but just don't say anything right now. Or we'd have certain signals, like if he was about to say something, I could like hit him and, elbow him or something, like, don't do that. And he would do the same thing because obviously I didn't do everything right either. But if you can have, ways as parents to communicate or partners to communicate, if you can see that your kid is starting to feel very uncomfortable about things.
Yeah, I think before Christmas, we were watching something and the comment was, "Oh, I really like her hair." And they just flipped out. And I was like, "You can't
Yeah.
say anything anymore." It creeps them
Ever.
out, and
Yeah.
I know it doesn't make any sense, and I know it makes you feel weird, but you have to stop talking.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah. And they don't get it.
No,
Like,
and and I think it's one of those
hmm
things, and I don't know, not to go too much into this, but I don't know if it's because of just the way women have to move in the world versus men, and we have to consider so many more things because of
mhm,
just, society and whatever. And I feel like men don't necessarily have to do that. They can just say
mhm.
whatever and do whatever, and they don't have to consider like a laundry list of things. Whereas as women, we
Yeah.
have to pay attention to, well, was there a shift in this? Or like, is this safe or whatever? And I feel
Mhm,
like because of that, like, I
mhm,
expect that these children are going to change in terms of something was okay yesterday is not okay today. Or, it's the same thing with favorite foods. It's like
mhm,
they've eaten the same thing for 3 years and now all of a sudden they hate that and they never want it again. And you had no idea. And now you're making it for dinner. So I feel like it's
mhm.
those, like, I kind of expect those things, but I feel like for dads, it seems like maybe they're not as expecting. They're expecting like, oh, this is always going to be this little child who behaves this way and they're into this thing
Mm.
and they're not anymore because they're teenagers and they're growing up.
yeah. For girls in particular, they're so cute and loving at like
Yeah.
6, 7,
Mm,
8, and then it kind of switches to that preteen thing, and they're just not the same kid. And I think fathers, and mothers can feel hurt because they lost their little girl or their little boy or whoever it is.
Yeah, it's definitely hard, especially I feel like with Facebook flashbacks and like your child has just said something and you're like, "Oh my gosh." And then you look and it's just like these little puffy faced kid pictures. And I'm like, where did that kid go? But it's like constantly meeting a
Yeah,
new person. I feel like over a course of a certain
it
number of
is.
years and kind of figuring out, well, how can I fit in with this version of this person in their life and all of that. This is really good. Oh, I was going to ask too, because, teens can be very moody and irritable because of the hormones and
mm,
all the things. Is there a threshold for moody and irritable where you would maybe have them evaluated for something else like depression, or where you would maybe say like this is above and beyond and I should be concerned at this point?
Yeah, I would say sudden changes in mood and irritability. So if it's been gradual and, you can notice that it's just starting, it's the adolescence process and that kind of stuff. And they're just, maybe for girls in particular, moody around their cycle, things like that. I think that's sort of within the realm of normal. But if there are sudden mood changes and their grades drop and they're hanging out with different kids, and their behavior seems completely different, then yeah, I would be kind of worried then. I would consider, is there any kind of drug use? Is there depression? Is there anxiety? All of those things. At that point, I think if it's really dramatic and you're not able to talk to them about it, I would consider getting it checked out. Or even, you could start with your pediatrician, because sometimes kids have relationships with their pediatricians and will be a little bit more open with them. And it's a little bit more acceptable than saying, I want you to go to therapy. If the pediatrician says, oh, I have this person who's a counselor and they may be easy to talk to and whatever, then it's somehow more acceptable. But yeah, just to repeat, any kind of sudden changes are the things that I would be most worried about.
Well, this was all super helpful. I know for me personally, I've taken some things away that I'm going to implement this week or try this week to connect with my 3 teens. And Pam, thank you so much for joining us. This has been super awesome. And we are going to invite Pam back in the next couple of weeks to talk about social media and bullying and how you can handle that as a parent. And thank you everyone for listening. Thank you for joining us this week. As always, if you'd like more information and support, please check out our site at dartmouth-health.cobalt.care for additional content, connection to resources, support groups that you can sign up to attend, or to connect to one of our clinicians for counseling, psychotherapy, or medication evaluation. We appreciate you listening and hope you have a wonderful week.